So I'm here with David Powell at Grace Point Church in Powell, Wyoming, and the church has just gone through a name change. And I've asked David to tell us a little bit about the process by which they went through to determine how to do this. A lot of churches go through these types of things and often wonder what's the best practice and how churches navigate that. And so, but before you tell us about that, can you just give us a quick background of you coming to this church, how long you've been here? Tell us a little bit about the church.
Yeah, well, First Baptist in Powell had been here basically since 1909, 1910, as old as Powell itself. And so we have a long history here. I've been here for almost 13 years. I came as associate pastor, and a couple of years later was senior pastor due to some changes, and so it's a great community, great church family.
What size is the community? Well, how many people live
We're
here?
about 6,000, a little over 6,000
Okay.
here in Powell.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a great fellowship. But we had a lot of people that over the years that are part of our church that came from other denominations too, and so we had a lot of people in our church that said, "Well, I'm not really Baptist, but I sure like going to church here." So we've always had kind of that mix within our congregation.
Yeah. Well, I was on staff here at this church, about 2002 or someplace in there.
Yeah.
Here for almost 2 years before I went on to another church, and I don't think I did too much damage. I think you were able to work through the issues I brought to the church. But
Right.
anyways, it was a good time, good ministry. Love the community of Powell, and it's just a great place to live. So again, what precipitated the idea of changing the name of the church, and then let's talk about how you went through that process.
Yeah. Well, these little conversations would come up among certain people within our congregation, like, we should change the name of our church. And over the years, it would come up every once in a while, but we always had, what we felt like at the time were bigger fish to fry. Last year, I guess a little over a year ago, it began to become more a front and center issue for me, because we became aware that there were some people who were in our community who would say things like, "Well, y'all have a great church, but I would never go to a Baptist church." And that was just a hurdle for them for one reason or another. And so the other thing that played into this was just the changes with our post-Christian culture and the mentality of people. People are less familiar with denominational histories, but certainly I felt like the name Baptist was not really helping us. And so I was driving back from California. I had been out there for some schooling. Came back. On the way back, I just felt like God said, "It's time to talk about changing the name of the church." And I said, "Yeah, it is. It's time to start thinking about changing the name of the church." And as I thought about it, I thought, well, basically I just want to ask a question. Does our name help us in our mission, or is it possibly a hindrance or an obstacle to people? And that was a question that I came back and I broke it to our elders first. I said, does our name help us or hinder us in what we're trying to accomplish here? I personally don't have a problem with the name First Baptist Church. I've been a part of Baptist churches all my life, and it's not a big deal for me. It's not a preference issue for me. But looking at what we're trying to accomplish, does it help us or not? And so we just started a conversation amongst our leadership initially with our elders. And initially their response was, "Are you sure you want to kick up this dust? Are you sure you want to kick the beehive like this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do," because I really feel like we have to ask these hard questions. We are about mission here, and we need to be intentional about what we're doing. And so if our name is not helping us do that, then why wouldn't we want to change it so that we can get the gospel to people? And so anyway, conversations like that with our elder board, and then with our leadership team, our deacons and deaconesses and other leaders. And initially there was some reluctance, like, I don't know that I really want to wade into this. And but I continued to just raise the question. And then there were a number of people, number of leaders that were like, yeah, it would really be a good idea to change the name of the church. And so we talked about that amongst the leadership team for a month or two, and then at a congregational meeting in April, we opened it up to the whole congregation. And I was always very, everything was on the table. There weren't anything going on, there weren't any side conversations or things, this is just an honest question that I have. I feel like God's called me to ask this question. And I don't know if we're going to change the name of our church or not, but we do need to grapple with this question because we need to be intentional about our mission.
Very good. Very good. So, what came of those discussions of bringing it to the table?
Well, like I said, initially there was some reluctance. I think some people were really surprised that we would think about changing the name of our church. But I think one of the things that that I was impressed by was that some of our people really didn't have an understanding of how a non-Christian might view the term Baptist. It's like they never thought of it. And so just the whole idea that Baptist, could for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, it could communicate a legalism, a judgmental position. Everybody's familiar with Westboro Baptist and the kinds of things that they do and those kinds of things. And so that came out a little bit. The congregational meeting was actually where the whole idea picked up steam. Because as we talked about it, at first there was not that much conversation, but then people began to raise their hand and give input. I just put it out there that I'm asking this question: does our name help us or hurt us? People began saying things like, well, I can see that for a lot of people in our community, Baptist is kind of an obstacle or something that's not attractive to them. And in fact, people say, well, yeah, amongst my LDS friends, their perception is that Baptists hate Mormons. And, well, we don't hate Mormons. And so that's not really helpful. Another person said, well, whenever somebody asks me where I go to church, I always kind of pause and then I say, well, I go to First Baptist Church, but it's a really good church. And so they just felt like they had to qualify their answer with a but. To explain, but they're really nice people over there, or things like that. And it's like, if you're having to qualify the name of your church with a but, maybe there's an issue there.
yeah, very much so. Yeah, I remember we changed the name at First Baptist to Chugwater, and you wouldn't think in a small community it'd make much difference. But it was basically that every time we would say who we are, we would say, but we're not like other Baptist churches. And the Westboro, really, when we did that a number of years ago, back in the late 1990s, it was the whole Westboro thing and the whole gay issue and all of that was really prime in Wyoming, and led to our doing that. But I didn't navigate that quite as well as you have this name change.
I tried not to have any axe to grind. I just tried to say, let's look at this in honesty and sincerity together. And if we have a problem, we have a problem. And people would ask, well, what do you want to change it to? And I said, I don't know. I don't have a name I'm gunning for. That's not the question before. I'm trying to ask, do we have a problem? And I think we might have a problem. And so we're just talking about whether that's true or not. Another thing that came to the surface was nobody could really say what the term Baptist meant. Why are we Baptist? And so, well, maybe it has something to do with polity or things like that. Yeah, that could be in how we're structured. But one of the things that I brought out is that there's so many different kinds of Baptists in the world. There's Free Will Baptist, there's Reformed Baptist, there's KJV Baptist, there's Fundamental Baptist, there's Liberal Baptist churches, and so here we are, First Baptist Church. We have the exact same name, First Baptist Church of Powell. There's a First Baptist Church of Cody, and so would you think that those two churches would be similar? And yeah, you would.
You would.
But they're not.
Not at all.
They're fundamentalists, we're not. So what are we communicating? And then when we asked, well, what does it mean to be Baptist? Well, that became a very hard question for us to answer. Well, does it mean that we immerse people when we baptize them? Well, yeah, that's part of it. But there's a lot of other churches, non-denominational churches and things, that they immerse people. Yeah. Evangelical Free immerses people. And so that's not a distinctive. So what is the distinctive? And it became clear that Baptist really doesn't communicate a whole lot about what kind of church you are.
Yeah, yeah. So from that point, from those meetings, how did you navigate this whole process to come to a point where you came up with a new name?
Well, at that business meeting, we kind of resolved to just sort of continue the conversation and continue thinking about that. I thought it was important that they didn't feel like I was trying to ramrod what I wanted. And so we just kind of let it lay and let it incubate there for a little while. Everything was out on the table and everybody had a chance to talk about it. We asked people to talk to their friends outside the church to see what they thought of the name First Baptist Church. And it wasn't just the Baptist part of it, it was also the first part of it. Because I've been asked, well, why are you the First Baptist Church, And so that was a little bit of a hang-up too. But anyway, we just let that kind of incubate there for a while. And then in August, so that was April, then in July, August, the elders put together a task force to look at the feasibility of changing our name. Basically, we populated this task force with people that we thought were dialed in missionally on what we're trying to do as a church, who understood the community outside the church and the mindset of people who are far from God, and to look at more deliberately, I guess a little bit more formally, about is it worth it to go through the trouble to change our name, and just see if they would come away with a recommendation. We gave them kind of a short window. We only gave them about a month, 4 to 6 weeks to do that. And so at the end of September, they came back with a recommendation. As they looked at it, they came back with the recommendation that it is worth it to look at changing our name. And so that at our October business meeting, when the church body was together, we discussed the recommendation. We let that task force answer questions from the congregation about why they came to those conclusions, and they were able to speak in that as well. And then we took a vote to change the name of our church, and it was, I think we had an 87% vote, if I remember right, somewhere around 90, but I think a little under 90% voted to change. So that's when we actually went over the waterfall. It's like, well, we're not considering changing our name now. We are going to change it. We just don't know what we're going to change it to.
So just backing up a second here, a couple of things that I think are really critical in this that you've hit upon already. First of all, just to bring it for discussion, no real agenda. It's not like we are changing it and we have to get you to a point to accept it. It's the open discussion, asking the right questions of, is our name helping us, or is it a hindrance? Is it neutral to the issue? And basically understanding it's not neutral, it has implications. I think that was key, because I think that opens people's minds to it. The second thing that you did that I think is very, very positive is the selection of the task force. It sounds like to me, and maybe you can affirm this, that you look for people not with the agenda to change the name, but people that own the mission and the vision of the church, that were invested not only in the church but also invested in the community enough to care about what the community had to think or say about it. And so those two things really, I think, set the table for the discussion, because it sounds like to me that you didn't come and you communicated very intentionally, we don't have an agenda here. We don't have a name already picked out. We don't have anything. We just want to, let's talk about this. And so I think that really is a very positive way to deal with things. One of the things that I found in doing the job that I'm doing now is how churches process these types of things. And I think it's so critical to have those kind of forums where people aren't allowed to make a decision. You're not voting on it, you're just talking about it. and like you said, I think that's where you plant the seed for people to be able to ask questions and even ask themselves questions where they aren't forced to make a decision at that particular point. So great wisdom in that. Whether you felt like it was wisdom or not, I just see great wisdom in creating an atmosphere where people can talk about things that are really touchy issues, because there's a lot of emotion to a name. 100-year-old church that's carried this name all those years, that's a lot of history there. So people really own that, and so to give them the opportunity, the freedom to say, yeah, but maybe there's another side to this. So you came to the point, you as a church decided to change the name, but at that point there wasn't a name on the table. There wasn't any discussion at that point. Did that task force, were they then challenged to do that, or was another group formed to come up with a name?
We retasked that same task force to look at possible names for the church. And basically, I didn't know, how do we do this now? I didn't really have an idea, but we just basically kind of said, we want you guys to come up with 2 or 3 names and submit them to the elders. And then the elders would take them to the congregation, or take one to the congregation. And so we made that a pretty public process, because we invited, we solicited names from the congregation. We put, an insert into the bulletin to give people a chance to write down some name ideas and put them in the offering plate, and then we would collect them, and the task force would look at that. We invited anybody who wanted to could come to the meetings of the task force. We advertised when those meetings were going to be, and they could come and give input. They could sit in, they could just listen, whatever. And so it was a very public process. And so those who wanted to be a part of it easily could be a part of it. And it was just, that was their choice if they wanted to or not. Now, we didn't have a huge number of people avail themselves of that opportunity. We did have a number of recommendations turned in, on slips of paper. Think about this name, and we even had one anonymous note that said, "Here's an idea for your new name. Don't." And so anyway, that was kind of interesting. So there was a little bit of pushback, but nothing. Like I said, it was anonymous, and you can't really do anything about that anyway. So we just continued to press forward, and that was probably the most difficult aspect of this, was coming up with a name.
Mm. So when that task force was done, they came with 2 names, 3 names?
They came with 3 names.
Did they?
Yeah. And we turned over every rock. I really feel like, and it was a little bit of a discouraging process, and after a while the task force got a little bit discouraged, like, we're never going to agree on anything, and a lot of good ideas were thrown out. We tried to focus on themes. What are the main themes that we think are critical for us to emphasize in a name? Grace, community, relationships, truth, the gospel, Christ. All of those big time themes were part of our discussions, but we were really looking for something that was out of the box. Okay. But we also realized that Powell is not really an out of the box kind of location. I mean, we're not Boulder, Colorado, and so relatively conservative rural community, but a college here, and so anyway, we really tried to be creative. And I kind of realized in this process, there's only so many good names for church. It's not an endless list. Yeah. And we ended up coming back to Grace Point. So.
Okay. At that point, the board shared that with the congregation. It was brought to a vote. How was that vote? Was there the numbers there? What kind of response?
It was unanimous.
Well, okay. Very good.
Praise God.
Yeah.
It was unanimous, and nobody recorded abstaining from the vote. I think probably not everybody voted in favor, but it was overwhelming. Nobody registered another dissenting opinion. Yeah.
So here you have a new name. Notice you don't have a sign right now. You're a church without a name, but you're undoubtedly you're in the process of rebranding
we are.
things that are going on here.
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you see using this name change to have a greater impact on the community?
Well, we've tried to be really intentional about that, because this really represents an opportunity for us, because people are going to say, First Baptist Church, are you not a Baptist church anymore? And why would you, I mean, especially Catholics are like, why would you change the name of your church? Or Mormons are like, why would you do that? And so it represents an opportunity for us to say, well, honestly, we felt like First Baptist Church didn't really communicate who we were as a people or what we were trying to accomplish. Our purpose isn't to make people Baptists.
Right.
It's to help people know Jesus personally and live their lives for Him. And so Grace Point, we really feel like we changed the name of our church because grace is the core of our relationship with God. It's the central reality of our lives, and that God has reached into. And so changing the name represents an opportunity to share the gospel with people and to take advantage of this momentum. And I would say that it has energized us. And it's given new ownership to people, I think, about the direction of our church and the future of our church.
Wow.
And tied in with this was the feeling that we have an awesome heritage. So we didn't try to disparage our history at all. We have something that has been handed to us for such a time as this, that comes from those who have gone before us. They didn't do everything perfect. We don't do everything perfect either. We make a lot of mistakes. But they had handed us this legacy. And so it's our responsibility as stewards of that to make the most of it. And the name change is very much a part of that.
Yeah.
So the way that you're faithful to the heritage that's been handed to you is not by keeping your name. It's by doing the mission of the church. And so it just represents, and so we've made these frequently asked questions, because we just try to drill into our congregation. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And you need to have answers, so that when somebody at work asks you, what'd you guys change your name for? Then you don't go, oh, I don't know. You say, well, this is why. And you get to talk about the gospel.
Oh, that's great.
So,
and you've intentionalized that communication to the congregation and encouraged them. And
I have.
Yeah.
But you got to keep reminding.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, again, the church has such a rich history in the community, and yet this is an opportunity to expand that influence and to have a greater impact, which, is all every church should be about. Is how can we have a greater impact for the gospel?
Yeah.
Abandon our pride, abandon the issues that have a tendency to divide churches.
And we still have the same issues.
Yeah.
We still, it's not like it fixes everything.
No.
And the way that I really conceive it, we're just removing an obstacle. Yeah. We're just trying to be more intentional about who we are. One of the questions that came up with some people was, are you guys changing your beliefs? Are you going liberal? As if being Baptist makes you conservative. But that's how people feel when you change your name. What else are you willing to change? And so we had to say, look, we've already revised our doctrinal statement. We're not doing anything with that. We're not changing our affiliation with Conservative Baptist or Rocky Mountain Church Network. This is just the name. This is just the name. Yeah. And that gives people a security when you start talking about these kinds of changes.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks for giving me these few minutes and talking about an issue that a lot of churches either have struggled with in the past or are going to be facing as we move forward. Again, we should be about the mission that God has called us to be engaged in. And it's got to be gospel-centered, and it has to be outwardly focused. And those are just absolutely key for any church to think about how we can be more effective in that. So, hey, thanks so much for the opportunity.